Ring is one of those movies that people remember first through a rule before they even know the plot. You watch the tape, the phone rings, 7 days later, you're toast. The rule is simple enough to repeat, which is exactly why this works. It sounds like something you'd hear at a sleepover or in a school hallway, or from a friend of a friend of a friend who swears that they know somebody that this exact thing happened to. It has the shape of an urban legend, but the movie's real power comes from where they place that legend. The curse isn't in some kind of ancient book, and it's not in a haunted house, it's not in an artifact, and it's not in some kind of forbidden ritual space. It puts it directly inside media. That's what makes The Ring such a strong first horror movie for this retro horror school series called The Horror That Raised Us. Because this series is about the horror movies that shaped how millennials learned to read fear. Not only the movies that we remember and not only the movies that we grew up watching, but the movies that trained a generation to recognize danger in certain places. And The Ring trained millennials to fear the screen. The movie made watching feel like participation. It suggested that media could enter your home, mark you, and then make you responsible for what happened next. That's why The Ring still works even though the technology itself has aged. The tape and VHS players may belong to 2002, but the fear itself does not. Hi, I'm Brandy, otherwise known as the Terrorific Lady, and welcome back to Retro Horror School, where we discuss, dissect, and analyze horror from the 1970s through the 2010s and talk about horror like it matters, because it does. As I mentioned, today we are talking about The Ring in the first lesson of this new series, and The Ring works in a very specific way. It's a movie about what happens when horror starts moving through media systems. It's about watching, copying, sharing, and surviving to ensure that the curse does not end with just you. So the question I'm working with is this: what did The Ring teach millennials about watching? One of the reasons The Ring became so sticky in horror culture is that its central rule becomes impossible to forget. You watch a tape, the phone rings, and 7 days later, you're toast. And that structure matters because a rule gives horror people something to hold on to. The moment a story has a rule, it becomes easier to repeat. That's true of urban legends, playground rumors, sleepover dares, and stories built around cause and effect. Say Bloody Mary's name 3 times in the mirror. Say Candyman's name 5 times. Go to this place at midnight. Watch this particular tape, wait 7 days later, and see what happens. The results are not going to be good. The rule creates the fear, but it also creates the temptation, because once you have that rule, our brains and our little thing called curiosity does the rest of the work for us. That's exactly how The Ring opens. The tape is not introduced through some formal academic lecture or some ancient mythology story. It's introduced through teenagers talking. Becca introduces the story to her friend Katie, like this story has already been in transit and in motion long before the movie even started. And that's important because at this point in the movie, it's not asking us to understand the tape right away. It's only asking us to understand the warning. Oh, you're gonna croak in 7 days. And that's what happens with this tape and when people watch it. And that warning is enough. What makes The Ring different from an older ghost story is that the ritual doesn't look like a ritual at first. Watching a videotape, it's ordinary, it's casual, it's something that people did all the time. So you don't think anything of it. The movie turns that ordinary act into a ritual after the fact. You don't know that pressing that play button counts until you're already too late. You do not know that phone call is part of the process until the tape ends. You don't know what the screen can do until the story already pulls you in. That's where the movie's millennial horror literacy begins, because danger doesn't necessarily have to announce itself as danger and scream it in your face. Sometimes it looks like the media that you were already prepared to consume. The central fear in The Ring is what watching the tape does to the viewer. The tape itself is disturbing because it's weird. It doesn't explain itself, it doesn't give context, it doesn't offer any kind of clean story with a beginning, middle, or end. It gives us fragments: water, bodies, a ladder, some random chair, mirror, a well, images that connect before our minds even begin to figure out how. And that lack of context is part of the horror. When something looks meaningful but it refuses to clarify its meaning or give any sort of context, our brains rush to fill in the gaps. It tries to categorize, it tries to organize. It starts looking for patterns because that's what our brain does, is trying to help us figure out the answer. The movie turns that interpretive instinct into a trap because we are also trying to figure out what the tape means right alongside Rachel. That's what makes the viewing experience so effective. The film builds our curiosity around the tape before we even see it. We hear the story, we learn the rule, we see how people react to everything about it, and by the time Rachel sits down to watch the tape, we're like, okay, what is this tape all about? What is everyone talking about? That means the movie depends upon the same curiosity that it's warning about. It does not let the audience sit above the characters and judge them for wanting to know more, because we as viewers want to know more too. That is why watching becomes more than just a passive act in the ring. Once that tape ends and once the phone rings, we are no longer sitting outside of the horror, we are inside it. We're on the timeline, and the act of watching creates consequences. That was a very specific fear for the millennial generation growing up, and especially growing up around media that kept expanding its reach. A lot of millennials learned early that images, files, messages, and rumors could show up in your life without much warning. Someone handed you a tape, sent a file, forwarded an email, told you to click a link. Someone said, oh, you have to see this, and curiosity did the rest. The Ring takes that ordinary media curiosity and gives it a death sentence. That's why the tape is scary, because of what it does between the relationship of the viewer to the image. Once you watch it, you're involved. The most important thing that The Ring does is that it reveals that the curse turns the viewer into a carrier. If the movie was just only about a haunted tape that killed anyone who watched it, yeah, it would still be creepy, don't get me wrong, but it would be a much simpler kind of story. The Ring becomes more disturbing when we learn that survival depends on duplication. Rachel survives because she makes a copy. Aiden survives because Rachel helps him to make a copy. The curse continues because the only way to escape it is to pass it on down the line. That means the solution is also the infection. This is where The Ring becomes a story about contaminated media. The curse spreads through the same basic process that media spreads through. Someone hears about it, finds it, watches it, copies it, and then someone else becomes the next viewer. And the process repeats. The object, in a sense, is supernatural and spooky, but the circulation is familiar. That's why Richard Morgan's line about reporters matters. When he accuses Rachel of taking one person's tragedy and then forcing the world to experience it, spreading it like sickness, he is identifying one of the movie's most central fears. He may not be fully explaining the curse, but he understands the structure. Tragedy, images, story, and pain can spread, and in The Ring, it becomes the mechanism of horror. This is also where the movie connects so strongly to millennial technology. The Ring came out in a period where people were learning that copying and sharing were not always neutral acts. Burned CDs, Napster, LimeWire, strange downloads, chain emails, and computer viruses all belong to a media environment where duplication could feel useful, exciting, risky, and sometimes destructive. The movie uses a VHS tape, but the fear is bigger than the tape. It's the fear that a piece of media can carry something harmful within it that can infect, replicate, and survive by being passed along. One of the strongest visual ideas in The Ring is the way that the TV changes meaning. At first, the TV is an object, it's familiar, it It belongs in the room, it belongs in the home. It's something that people use for entertainment, distraction, research, or just background noise. The minute the cursed tape plays, that changes. The screen starts feeling like an opening. That is why everyone, myself included, remember that moment so vividly when Samara crawls out of the TV screen. It's scary because the movie collapses the distance that screens usually provide people. A screen normally creates separation. Hey, look, the horror, it's over there. It's in the movie. It can't get us. You can turn off the TV and walk away. The Ring takes that comfort away and uses the screen as the route that horror uses to enter the room. That matters for millennials because the screen was becoming more private and more essential to everyday life. TVs were in bedrooms, VHS tapes, yes, still, and DVDs were part of home viewing and entertainment. Computers were becoming household objects, and the internet was less of a, novel thing and more of a thing that people spent their time on, their free time on. So when The Ring makes the TV feel unsafe, it attacks something that already feels normal and integrated into our lives. The movie understands that technology feels more frightening when it becomes ordinary. A haunted castle is frightening because it's separate from everyday life. You're not going to find a haunted castle in your neighborhood or on the corner of the street. A cursed tape is frightening because it can sit right on your shelf. A ghost in an old mansion is one kind of fear. A ghost that comes through your TV in the living room is another. The Ring shifts horror from a place you visit to a medium you invite in. Sometimes the screen is how things get in. The Ring is especially effective because it keeps changing our position as viewers. At first, we are observers. We hear about this creepy urban legend from a distance, from the way that Becca and Katie talk about it. Then we become investigators with Rachel. We follow clues, we connect images, and we try and figure out what happened to Samara. As the movie continues, we become witnesses to the consequences. The story is no longer just a rumor. People are dying or going to die, and the tape does not stay contained. By the ending, the movie moves us into a much more uncomfortable position. We become participants, at least symbolically, because we understand what Rachel is going to do. She makes a copy, helps Aiden survive, keeps the curse moving. That is what makes the ending work. The movie doesn't give us a clean defeat of evil. Evil is not defeated, but it does give us a survival strategy. A strategy that depends on someone else becoming the next victim. Rachel's role as a mother matters because the movie does not frame the decision that she made as just she's cruel. She's trying to save her child, and that's what makes her choice understandable, and that's what makes us empathize with it. And that's also why it's so uncomfortable. For much of the film, Rachel approaches this mystery as if it can be solved through investigation and truth. She investigates Samara's life, she uncovers what happened to her, and believes that finding the body might bring closure. And in many ghost stories, that would be the case. Find the truth, acknowledge the dead, and the haunting ends. The Ring refuses that comfort. Aiden's warning that Samara does not want to be helped changes the entire shape of the story. Samara's not asking for peace, she's demanding circulation. Her message isn't something to resolve, it's something that she wants spread. That's why the ending feels like more of a moral compromise rather than the, victory, we did it. Rachel saves Aiden, but the curse survives. The movie leaves us with the knowledge that protection can become contamination. When our survival depends on us paying it forward in a really bad way, that is one of the darkest lessons that The Ring teaches. Sometimes horror does not ask whether you could stop the evil. Sometimes it asks what you are willing to do when you realize that, you can't. The Ring also feels important because it anticipates a lot of horror language that becomes more visible later. Today we have terms like analog horror, cursed images, lost media, creepypasta, liminal spaces, and Do not watch this culture. The tape is a lesson on how media can haunt the viewer. I already talked about just how very little that the tape explains. So the less the tape explains, the more the viewer has to participate in making the tape frightening. The title of the movie reinforces this structure. The ring is connected to the well, the circle of light that was the last thing that Samara saw before being shut up in darkness, and to the phone call that marks the countdown. It's also the nature of the curse itself. It is a loop. The viewer watches, the phone rings, 7 days pass, a copy is made, another viewer watches, the cycle continues. That circular structure is what makes The Ring feel so connected to later internet horror. The media object changes, the behavior remains the same. It might be a tape in 2002. It might be a link, a file, a video, a post, a rumor, or a piece of misinformation now. The fear is harmful media survives because people keep circulating it and sharing it. So what did The Ring teach millennials? It taught us that media could enter the home and change the atmosphere of a room. It taught us that screens were not always safe boundaries. It taught us that curiosity could become a trap before we realized that we were inside one. It taught us that copying and sharing could spread more than just entertainment. Most importantly, it taught us that watching could create responsibility. The movie's central lesson is not, hey, VHS tapes are scary. The lesson is that media can change the person who receives it. It can make you curious, implicated, traumatized, and responsible. It could pull you into a story that you thought you were only watching, and that is a very millennial horror lesson, because a lot of us came from one media world and entered another. We knew video stores, tapes, landlines, and urban legends. Then we moved into downloads, message boards, chain emails, file sharing, virality, and eventually social feeds where fear and misinformation could spread faster than anyone could correct that misinformation. The Ring sits at the doorway between those worlds, and then it turns that doorway into a big threat. That's why this film is so important, because it captures that shift in horror language. The haunted place becomes the haunted medium. The ghost story becomes the circulating file. The viewer becomes part of the system, and once that happens, horror isn't just something that's waiting in the woods, in the basement, in the haunted house, or the dark hallway. It can visit us through the media that we invite into our homes. Next time in this series, The Horror That Raised Us, I'll be looking at Final Destination, and how it taught millennials to read everyday life as a threat assessment, where the danger was hidden just in the ordinary world all around us. If you like this video and you want more horror analysis that's not just a plot recap of the movie, then make sure that you are subscribed if you're not already, and hit that bell. And also be sure to like this video, because liking, sharing, and subscribing really helps out the channel. And if you're new here, I have a Start Here playlist that I will link up above, so that way you can get more of a better feel from this video and that playlist on how Retro Horror School approaches horror. As always, thank you for being here. Class is dismissed for now, but I'll see you next time. Bye.
7 days.